The rain felt like the world was weeping with me. I was kneeling on the driveway outside my own house in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, gripping my son Michael against my chest while raindrops ran down his hair and mine as if to mingle our tears with the storm. I stared into the glowing windows behind that slammed door, our home, but it felt like a place I no longer belonged. My suitcase lay there, soaking wet, a mute testament to the life we were being forced out of. I whispered, my voice shaking, "David, please, not in front of our son." But there was nothing, just the dull echo of rain on pavement and the jagged crack of heartbreak that could not be ignored. At that very moment, everything changed. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. If you were in Emily's place standing in that rain with your child, would you have begged him to stay or walked away? I wasn't always standing in the rain with my son, watching my world close behind a locked door. Before that night, my life looked ordinary from the outside, maybe even admirable. I worked as a nurse in one of Atlanta's busy hospitals, rushing through long shifts yet always finding time to come home and read Michael a story before bed. I wanted him to know that even if the world outside was noisy and demanding, his mother's arms were always a safe place. David, my husband, worked as a corporate manager, and for years we built what looked like a strong family. He was charming, ambitious, and when we first met, I believed his love could shelter me from every storm. But looking back now, I see the signs that his attention was slipping away long before I admitted it. Little cracks appeared, small, but each one cut deeper than I realized. At first, it was the anniversaries. David forgot the date of our wedding one year, something he never would have overlooked in the past. I brushed it off with a smile, convincing myself he was busy with work, that corporate deadlines had simply stolen his memory. But then it happened again the next year, and the year after that. The dinners we used to share turned into nights where I sat alone with Michael while David worked late. He began taking calls at strange hours, whispering in another room, and when I asked, he dismissed my questions with a practiced laugh and a gentle pat on my shoulder. "It's just work, Emily," he would say, but even then I felt a shift in his eyes, as if I were no longer his first thought. My heart told me the truth, but I fought it back with excuses because I wanted so desperately to believe that our family was unbreakable. It wasn't long before another name slipped into our world. Vanessa. She was introduced as a realtor, someone David's company worked with often. At first, she was just a face in passing, a smile too wide, a voice a little too familiar. But soon she started appearing more frequently, not just in his office, but at company gatherings, and somehow uncomfortably at our family events. I remember one party vividly. Vanessa leaned too close to David while laughing at something he said, her hand lingering on his arm. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that perhaps I was just tired from my shifts at the hospital. But deep inside, doubt began to grow. That doubt turned into quiet humiliation when friends whispered questions I couldn't answer, their eyes searching mine for signs that I understood what was happening. I smiled through it all, pretending everything was fine, because admitting the truth would have meant my world was already falling apart. Michael noticed too, though he was too young to put it into words. He asked me once why Daddy never came home for dinner anymore. I swallowed the lump in my throat and told him Daddy was busy, but the truth echoed louder in my mind each time David's phone lit up with Vanessa's name. One night, I walked past his office door and heard her voice on the speakerphone, low and playful. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, telling me it was a simple work call. But even as he spoke, I saw his hand tremble slightly and I knew he was hiding something. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself that silence would keep my family together. I told myself that maybe, if I just held on tighter, David would remember the woman he once loved, the vows he once made, the family we had built. I was wrong. It was at one of David's company events that the first wound cut deeper than I could hide. The ballroom was filled with colleagues and their families, everyone dressed to impress, sipping champagne under crystal lights. Michael clung to my side, shy in crowds, his small hand tucked into mine. Vanessa floated toward us in a glittering dress, her smile too polished, her voice carrying through the chatter. She looked down at Michael and let out a laugh that chilled me. "Oh, the poor boy," she said, loud enough for those around us to hear. My stomach twisted. I expected David to defend his son, to step in with the pride of a father. But instead he laughed along, his hand sliding into his pocket as if the comment had been nothing more than a harmless joke. I felt every eye in that room land on me, and though my face burned, I forced myself to smile. That moment stayed with me like a stain I couldn't wash out. After that night, David's distance grew sharper. He began staying out late, first with excuses about client dinners, then with none at all. I would wait by the window, lights dimmed, watching the driveway, hoping his car would appear. Sometimes he came home after midnight, his tie loosened, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. Other nights, he never came home at all. Michael started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. "Mom, is Daddy still at work?" he would whisper, his voice breaking me in ways words cannot describe. I would hold him close and tell him Daddy was busy, my own voice trembling with the lie. I prayed David would remember us, remember the promises he made. But with each unanswered call and each night alone, hope felt more like a cruel trick than a lifeline. The humiliation became unbearable. Friends stopped asking about David when they realized my answers never changed. At church, neighbors glanced at me with pity, whispers trailing behind me like shadows. I wanted to scream, to demand respect, but I swallowed every word. I told myself silence was strength, that dignity meant endurance. Yet inside, I felt myself breaking piece by piece. The worst was watching Michael's innocence fade. He stopped asking when Daddy would tuck him in, stopped setting aside his drawings to show him. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed, and I knew my son was learning the kind of disappointment no child should ever carry. Every day I reminded myself, hold on, protect Michael, don't let him see how much this hurts. And then came the night when the illusion shattered completely. David walked into the living room, his expression cold, his voice clipped with a finality that struck like a blow. He told me, calmly as if discussing business, that it might be best if Michael and I stayed somewhere else for a while. I froze, unable to breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear him. Before I could gather the courage to respond, he grabbed our bags, already packed, I realized, and dragged them to the door. With one swift motion, he tossed them outside, as if we were strangers unworthy of shelter. Rain had just begun to fall, a light drizzle that quickly turned into sheets of water. Michael clung to me, crying, as I pulled him close, shielding his small body with my own. I will never forget the sound of that door slamming behind us, the warmth of the home now locked away, the glow of lights inside that belonged to someone else. The rain soaked through my clothes, through Michael's jacket, until we were shivering in the driveway. Our suitcase sat there, just like in the image etched into my memory, black, silent, and heavy with the weight of betrayal. Michael's little voice whispered, "Mom, why can't we go inside?" I held him tighter, unable to answer, because the truth would break him. That was the night everything changed. That was the night the story you are hearing truly began. I had endured humiliation, betrayal, and nights filled with tears. But what I discovered next proved that everything I had feared was not just suspicion, it was truth. One afternoon, while sorting through the mail, I noticed a thick envelope addressed to David. It was from the bank, and though guilt pricked at me, something stronger pushed me to open it. Inside were statements that revealed more than I was prepared to see. Transaction after transaction showed money being funneled into an account I didn't recognize. At the top of the documents was a name that made my stomach twist: Vanessa. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each line confirming that David had been draining our savings, shifting what we had worked for into the hands of the woman who had replaced me in his heart. That night, I realized I was not only abandoned, but stripped of the life I had sacrificed to build. I didn't act immediately. I knew if I confronted David without proof, he would twist the truth, dismiss me as jealous, or worse, convince others that I had lost my mind. So I waited. I began quietly collecting everything I could. When he left his laptop open, I scanned through his emails, each one like a dagger. Messages from Vanessa filled the screen, conversations about weekend getaways, discussions about money, even laughter at my expense. I copied what I found, saving it in a folder hidden deep on my phone. Then came the photographs, images of David and Vanessa together in cities I had never visited, smiling as though they had built the family that was supposed to be mine. Each piece of evidence weighed heavy in my hands, but it was also the rope I planned to use to pull myself back from despair. I told myself silently, "Patience, Emily, patience." The night I finally confronted David is burned into my memory. It was late, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Michael was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm about to unfold. I sat at the kitchen table, the bank statements spread out before me, my hands clasped together to keep from shaking. When David walked in, loosening his tie and reaching for a glass of water, I looked him in the eye and said quietly, "We need to talk." He frowned, as though I had interrupted his peace, but I didn't waver. I slid the papers across the table, the numbers and Vanessa's name staring back at him. For the first time in years, he didn't have a ready excuse. His face paled, his lips parted, but no words came. I felt a surge of power I hadn't known in so long, a flicker of justice rising from the ashes of betrayal. Before David could answer, the front door opened and in swept Vanessa, uninvited, her laughter echoing through the hall. She was careless, unaware of what waited in the kitchen. She stepped into the room, still smiling, until her eyes fell on the papers between us. Her laughter stopped instantly, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed on my chest. She looked at David, then at me, her confidence faltering for the first time since she entered my life. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the seconds of their downfall. I sat there, calm but unyielding, holding proof of every lie they had told, every humiliation they had inflicted. And in that silence, I knew the balance had shifted. The power was no longer theirs. It was mine. Do you think I should expose them for everything they did? Or stay silent and suffer quietly? The silence of that night became the fuel for what I had to do next. I knew that if I reacted in anger, David would twist the story, and Vanessa would stand smugly by his side. So instead, I chose patience and calculation. The first step was financial. Quietly, I reached out to a lawyer in Atlanta who specialized in family law. I sat across from him in his office, the stack of bank statements and printed emails trembling in my hands. He studied them carefully, then looked at me with steady eyes and said, "You've got more than enough to act." That day I filed for separation. Together, we moved swiftly to freeze the accounts David had funneled money into. For the first time, I felt the ground shifting back beneath my feet. He thought he could strip me of everything, but now the rope he had woven was beginning to tighten around him instead. The second step came in the form of public truth. David's company was hosting its annual gala, a night he and Vanessa had been preparing for as if it were a coronation. I arrived quietly, wearing a dress I had once bought for our anniversary. As I stepped into the ballroom, heads turned, some in surprise, some in pity. But I walked with purpose, a folder clutched in my hand. David was at the center of it all, Vanessa beaming at his side. I waited until his speech began, the room filled with polite applause. Then, when the moment was right, I approached the stage and laid the documents on the podium. The silence that followed was deafening. Colleagues leaned toward each other, whispers spreading like wildfire. Vanessa's face turned pale, her smile collapsing. David stammered, reaching for words that wouldn't come. The applause never returned. Instead, The room was filled with judgment, eyes staring, reputations shattering. Vanessa's humiliation was immediate. She stormed out, her heels striking the floor like angry drums. For a woman who had basked in stolen confidence, there was nothing left but the sound of a door closing behind her. David, however, could not escape so easily. His boss pulled him aside, the folder of evidence now in company hands. By the end of the night, whispers of scandal filled every corner. Within weeks, he lost the promotion he had been so certain was his. The same colleagues who had once laughed at Vanessa's cruel jokes now avoided him in the halls. The corporate world he had sacrificed his family for turned its back on him. And Vanessa? She didn't wait around to share his downfall. The moment the money stopped flowing, so did her devotion. She disappeared from his life as quickly as she had entered mine, leaving him stranded in the very emptiness he had created. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I didn't fight in the way he might have expected. Instead, I let truth and patience do the work for me. Each consequence that fell upon David tied back to the cruelty he had inflicted. He mocked me in public, and now his shame was laid bare before the same eyes. He stripped me of security, and now his wealth and status slipped through his fingers. He walked out on me and Michael, and now Vanessa walked out on him, leaving him abandoned. The revenge I found wasn't loud or violent. It was the quiet collapse of everything he thought was unshakable. And as I watched him unravel, I felt no triumph, only a steady calm. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in silence, stripping the proud of their arrogance and leaving them face to face with the choices they can no longer escape. When the dust finally settled, I knew I couldn't keep living among the memories of Atlanta. Every street corner held a ghost. Every shadow reminded me of the life I had lost. So I packed what little we had left, took Michael by the hand, and started fresh in Charlotte, North Carolina. The move was not easy. Starting over never is. But I found work at a local clinic, throwing myself into long hours not just to make ends meet but to build a new life brick by brick. At first, the nights were still heavy. I would lie awake, wondering if I had made the right choice. Yet every morning when Michael smiled as he left for school, I knew I had chosen the only path that gave him hope. Slowly, our lives began to heal, not through grand gestures but through the steady rhythm of ordinary days lived with dignity. Michael thrived in Charlotte in a way I hadn't seen in years. At his new school, teachers praised his curiosity, his kindness, and his resilience. He joined the soccer team, running across the field with laughter echoing in the air, no longer weighed down by confusion or sadness. Watching him grow was like watching a flower bloom after a storm. I saw in his eyes the spark that had been dimmed during those painful years, now shining brightly again. For me, it was a reminder that children absorb the strength or weakness of the world around them, and it was my duty to fill his world with light, not despair. For the first time in a long time, our home was filled with joy, even if it was small, even if it was modest. Happiness did not come from luxury or status, but from the simple peace of knowing we were safe, together, and free. I often thought about David and what had become of him. From time to time, news would reach me through mutual acquaintances. They said he lost his promotion, his colleagues had turned their backs, and Vanessa had long since disappeared from his life. He was left with nothing but regret. Yet strangely, I felt no triumph in hearing it. There was no joy in another person's downfall, not even his. What I felt instead was distance, as though his story no longer had power over mine. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. While his arrogance crumbled, my dignity survived, and with it, I built a new chapter for Michael and me. Life doesn't hand you justice on a silver platter. You have to claim it through courage and patience. And in doing so, I found something greater than revenge. I found peace. The day I knew we were truly free was simple yet unforgettable. Michael and I stood outside our small home in Charlotte, the sun shining warmly on our faces. He laughed as he watered the flowers we had planted by the porch, and I couldn't help but smile. the memory of that stormy night in Atlanta flickering in my mind. This time there was no rain, no tears, no slammed doors locking us out. There was only light, hope, and the quiet contentment of survival. I bent down, kissed my son's forehead, and whispered, "We made it, Michael. We really made it." In that moment, I realized the suitcase once drenched in rain had been replaced with roots planted in new soil. We were no longer the broken family left outside in the storm. We were the stronger family that had walked through it and come out whole. And so, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: betrayal may hurt for a night, but dignity outlives the storm. People may try to strip you of your worth, mock you, or turn their backs, but the strength to rise again lies in your own hands. I thought I was powerless that night in the rain, but standing here today, I know I was never powerless. I was simply waiting for the right moment to reclaim my life. To anyone listening, hold on to that truth. You are stronger than the pain you carry, and no betrayal can define your ending. What defines you is the courage to keep going, for yourself and for those who depend on you. What would you have done in my shoes that night? Would you have begged him to let you in, or walked away with your dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the stories we bring to life.